Namo, Sakyamuni Buddha. Hello everyone, Kwang today here. And this week I'm going to begin my Four Noble Truths series. And today I'm going to begin with the first and second truth, and we'll end with the third and fourth next week. So before we actually get to the truths, let me just kind of backtrack a little bit and explain a little bit about what the four truths are. So the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism is really the essence of what Buddhism is. The Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path are kind of like the legs of Buddhism. They support everything else and all the other teachings in Buddhism. So those are the really two main teachings in Buddhism that we have to master, that we have to fully understand and comprehend before we can ever move forward to more advanced study. So I always tell people that when we first come into Buddhism, or if you're trying to study Buddhism, it's really important to fully grasp the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And I always stress that the best way to approach that is to take each Noble Truth and study it for 1 month. We're going to study it, we're going to read everything we can on it, we're going to contemplate on it, we're going to meditate on it, we're just going to reflect on it and just completely understand and master the first Noble Truth. And then we'll do that for every other truth. So we'll take one truth each month at a time, and then the same thing with Eightfold Path. And even though it takes a year for just those two teachings, that whole year is going to bring us so much knowledge and so much wisdom, and it's going to help us and make any other teaching in the future that we try to learn so much more easier to understand and grasp. So cannot stress enough the importance of really trying to master and just completely fully learn the Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path. So let's begin. So the Four Noble Truths explain the nature of our suffering, its causes, the cessation, and the path to cessation, which is the Eightfold Path. So, and the Four Noble Truths, like I mentioned, is the essence of Buddhism. So, and within the Four Noble Truths, we kind of have three components that cause us basically to suffer. And the first one is the physical and mental suffering of birth and aging, getting sick, and death. And the second is attachment to things that are changing or constantly changing. The third is the dissatisfaction of anything that is impermanent or transitory or just not meeting our expectations. And so those are kind of the three components that cause us to suffer. And so we take the Four Noble Truths and we contemplate on them. We understand them fully. We have to know. We go each truth at a time. And so the first one is life is suffering. Well, what is suffering? What does suffering mean to us? How are we suffering? Some of us may be, very privileged, or in situations where we kind of have everything we kind of need, or complete opposite where we're non-privileged and we have nothing at all. And so suffering to different people can mean different things. But in Buddhism, suffering, the translation of suffering, which is dukkha, is kind of an almost exaggerated translation. It doesn't necessarily mean like actual physical suffering or anguish or torture or whatever, but it more or less means dissatisfaction with our lives, the things in our lives and things surrounding in our lives. And we have to remember that we create our own suffering. So the reason that we suffer is because we allow things to kind of affect us negatively. And that negativity, of course, causes us to suffer or dissatisfied with the things around us. So that's the first noble truth, that life is suffering. But kind of what is suffering? Well, suffering physically means, like physical pain and injury and sickness and, of course, death. But it also means mental suffering, mental anguish, mental dissatisfaction, basically. So that includes, disappointment and jealousy, depression, sadness, anger, hatred, etc. And those are just kind of some of the things that cause us to suffer. There are many degrees of suffering, but life in its totality is imperfect and incomplete. And so, of course, everyone's going to say, well, there are moments where I'm happy and I'm not suffering and everything that I have and need is there and in my hands, etc., etc. But then we have to remember those are just moments. Those are just, very transitory, very temporary moments of happiness. And the Buddha taught us that true happiness comes from within and not from external circumstances. So, of course, some of us may have gotten the new iPhone that was just released last week. I'm one of them, unfortunately. But at the same time, we're super excited about it for the first few days, and then it just becomes our phone. Like, there's nothing really special about it anymore. So that is just kind of one example of temporary happiness. We get this brand new toy, and it's shiny and it's clean, and it's completely new and fresh. But then after a week, after 2 weeks, after a month, a few months, it just becomes another thing that we carry around with us. So the happiness that came from that kind of diminishes and goes away. So we tend to look for more things to kind of satisfy that happiness that we lost, that we had from the iPhone. The Buddha taught us that unless we can gain insight into the truth of reality and kind of figure out what is able to give us happiness and what is not able to give us happiness, then the experience of unsatisfactoriness will continue. So it's kind of our job to figure out on our own what is suffering to us, what is causing us that dissatisfaction, what is causing us to kind of always want more and always want to kind of go after things. And that kind of goes into the second noble truth, that what are the origins of suffering. So in the second noble truth, we kind of sit down in meditation and contemplate, okay, what is it that's causing me to kind of just be disappointed or sad or angry, or just kind of anything that causes dissatisfaction or suffering, anything that kind of is discomforting. We want to reflect on that and figure out why. And then the Buddha taught us that our main reason of suffering is desire and attachment, not just attachment to physical things or transitory things, but also our mental perceptions of things. So we may become attached and desire every new iPhone that comes out every year. So that constant desire of wanting and having to have that new iPhone is going to cause us to suffer. And if we don't get it, then we're just disappointed and sad and depressed about it, and we're just angry that we cannot obtain that new iPhone. And then if we do get the iPhone, then like I said, we're just kind of happy about it for the first week or two, and then it just becomes another object that we have to carry around. So that is just an example, one very easy example to showcase that our iPhone is causing us that desire of wanting the new iPhone, and it's causing that attachment that we have to have that iPhone, and that it's kind of this thing we have to cling to and just always obtain, always have. And so other examples, of course, include, people and our objects, our houses, our cars, and our loved ones. All these we kind of tend to create an attachment for, which isn't necessarily bad, but it's not good either. We tend to think that, our boyfriend, girlfriend, or our parents are kind of going to be there forever. Well, they're really not. Whether, they die or pass away or they break up, it's kind of an inevitable end in the end of it anyway. So, but we always want to think that they're always going to be there for us. They're always going to be around, and they're always going to be these things that we can kind of just hold on to. And that's really not the case. And so when they do, pass away, or the breakup does happen, we get extremely depressed about it. We're sad. We're moping around for days or months or years even. So, and that causes such dissatisfaction, such suffering. And that's where meditation really comes in hand. For me personally, I always meditate on death. It sounds morbid and it sounds weird, but it is my way of kind of coping and understanding the process of death, the process that death will happen, not only for me, but for my loved ones. Not always, but I tend to meditate on my mother's death. My mother, who is probably the only person in the world who I love more than anything else. And I meditate on that and sometimes when I first started meditating on my mother's death, I would cry every once in a while because I was like, oh my God, my mother is dying or dead or whatever. But as time went by and you continue that practice, then you kind of realize, okay, death is inevitable. So the only thing we can do is to accept it and understand it and know that it's going to happen. And that way when it does happen, we're not completely depressed and sad about it. We can be a little sad and know that death is happening, or will happen, but when it does, we kind of have this stronger understanding of it and a stronger acceptance of death. And so when someone does die, it's just kind of easier to cope with, and it's not as saddening, it's not as depressing as it could be for someone who doesn't meditate on death. And another reason for our suffering is craving. The people who kind of strive and go after, name and fame and wealth and all these kind of things that would make them such huge celebrities, and that constant craving for that is going to end up just kind of ruining our reality and things in our reality in life. That not everyone is going to become famous because you put a video up on YouTube or you do something crazy and it's on the news, but whatever. Sometimes we're very lucky and that does happen, but 99% of the time it's not. So our constant desire and craving to go after that is just kind of gonna hinder our reality of things. And then we also should know that there are three main causes of our suffering, which are the three poisons. The three poisons are ignorance, greed, and anger. And ignorance in Buddhism doesn't necessarily mean how we normally see ignorance or know what ignorance is. In Buddhism, it means more along the lines of lack of understanding. So if we go back to the death example, we may think that, as I said before, that our husband or wife or mother or father are going to last forever. They're going to be around forever because we love them so much and our love is going to keep them alive. And that's just kind of our ignorance, clouding our reality of that death is inevitable. It will be happening, and we have to understand it and accept it for it to give us that wisdom and that insight of understanding death. And then we have greed. Greed is our desire, I guess. It goes back to desire, and it goes back to attachment, that we always want things, whether we can or cannot have them. We suffer for the things we can't have, and we suffer for the things that we want, but still can't have. If that really makes any sense. I'm pretty sure it's repeated myself, but whatever. And then we have anger. Anger, of course, goes back to greed, because we can't have things that we want. We become really angry about it, and that just causes us even more suffering. So it's really important to understand that suffering is just, or dissatisfaction is always going to be there. There's no escaping suffering, and so the way out of that is just to kind of accept it and know that it's there. And even though our desires, our attachments there, we have to kind of go back and meditate and contemplate on these things and just know that even though suffering's there, we need to understand it. We need to accept it and kind of lessen those desires, lessen those attachments, and kind of just remove things that we may not necessarily have to have in our lives, whether they're physical objects or ideas or people. It doesn't really matter. Those are the things. If we know what is kind of causing our desire, our attachment, and greed and anger, then it's easier to kind of subdue them and kind of eradicate them from our lives. And that's just the easiest but also hardest way to kind of get over those three poisons and suffering in general. So that is the first and second noble truth for this week. Next week I will cover the third and fourth noble truth, and then from then we'll go into the Eightfold Path, which will be fun. So I'm sorry I'm a little hairy this week. I took the week off of work, so I decided not to shave. So now that I look at myself in the camera, it kind of looks really weird, but I'm sorry. But anyway, so next time we will continue our studies and our series. Thank you. Smile, be well. Namo Sakyamuni Buddha. Contrary to popular belief, meditation is not sitting cross-legged with your finger and thumb on your lap chanting Om.